welcome all. Thank you for joining us today. Within the Istanbul95 Talk series, tonight we're going to listen Barry Zuckerman from Boston University School of Medicine. As maybe you already know that this Istanbul95 program put together with the support of Bernard Van Leer Foundation. And we started this program last year, and today we are Barry Zuckerman is our fifth speaker, lecturer, and thanks for accepting our invitation, Barry.
Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for coming out on your holiday. I appreciate that. I want to provide a larger frame for what I think you're doing, maybe the why. And it has to do why societies change. Because in some ways you're about looking at whether it's the physical environment or in this case, the interpersonal environment. So societies need to produce the people who can contribute to that society. So if you go back over 100 years, maybe 200 years, throughout the world, in homes and in society, you wanted to support children to basically do what the society needed. And we're talking about agrarian societies. So basically, the women had responsibilities at home, and they learned that task. Men had responsibilities either, tending animals or the farm, and education was not a big, part. At least higher education was not needed. Society needed these people who produced the things that kept things going. So where are we now? Not only 200 years later, but even in the last 20 or 30 years, with the kind of technology changes we have. Does society still need to produce those people with the same skills? And actually one other thing I wanted to mention, not only for doing work in the home and doing work on a farm or the land, was also a need to support parents, because there was no Social Security. And so what happened when a parent, an older parent, got sick or all, it was up to the extended family to do that. All societies throughout the world are on a different continuum of, changing a little bit from the past to keeping the good things. And I think in the U.S. we're way past keeping some of the old things to our detriment. There's not much extended families living together, and we don't need to support our elderly parents because we have Social Security, and these break some of the ties that people have. So now with this, going from a service to a technology society, society itself, your civil society said, okay, we need children to have more of an education. In some countries it was 3rd grade, some countries it was 6th grade, some a lot more. But you're dealing with a society, people need to have the kind of education, cognitive skills to master not just the technology, but even a service economy to be able to give change and do business on all kinds of levels. So one of the changes society made is to ensure children are supported to get more education, and more children are going for longer education. But the other change comes from how these changes get reflected in parenting behavior. So parents have to do different things, and one is, if we extend school longer, we've learned a lot about early childhood, the fact that children start learning almost at birth, and so when they start school at age 4 or 5 or whenever, you want them prepared to be ready to learn. So it's not good enough to just start at 5th grade and continue. You want to lay the groundwork. And so parents' behavior is changing, because I think if you go back 30, 40 years, I'm going to talk about reading, and we'll talk about some other things. Parents didn't read to their children. The children did chores. The parents took care of things. Now this is important only because society's changed, and change has to occur at a large global level, and in some ways this is the design and some other things that you're doing here, and the other level is through parents. So I'm going to try and give some examples of both with an emphasis on the kind of children we need to produce to keep a society successful. And there's just one piece out of interest. Traditionally throughout the world, the emphasis in most societies was interdependence. People had to take care of each other, particularly agrarian societies. You didn't have very well-to-do people, and then there was a famine, and they had all the food, and other people didn't. People shared. Part of what we're seeing now in society throughout the world, varying in different countries, is a more emphasis on independence and autonomy, which is pretty significant in the U.S. Every parent wants their child to be a CEO or some person, and therefore you promote their self-esteem. Every time a child does something, you say how great they are. Even for a bodily function like a sneeze, you say, great sneeze. But this is, you're laughing, but this is true. There's such an emphasis on self-esteem that I worry about the other aspects of charity and interdependence and things at a civil society. Again, our country and I think a few other countries in Asia are really far along that, and what's going to happen, I don't know, and you can decide yourself where in your country where you are in that continuum, although you still have a lot of diversity here, a set of old values that people are very comfortable with and that have worked for generations, if not hundreds of years, and this new push. So I just wanted to place my comments in that context. So first I'll talk about the notion of what parents now I think can do and maybe need to do to prepare their children to enter school ready to learn. And that's basically reading to children. And when I say reading, what I'm going to talk to you about is the book is just a stimulus of something to create conversations so children are exposed to more words, children have an enjoyable interaction with parents. And if I was going to go to technology people and say, create me a widget that will stimulate a child's fine motor development, their cognitive development, their memory, their attention span, their language, I don't think they could come up with anything better than a book. The book does it with a parent, and I want to emphasize that, or with a caring adult, any caregiver, and that's the limitation of technology and iPads and iBooks for young children. They can do it themselves, but it's not just the information, it's not just the facts, it's really that kind of sharing. Particularly what I say to parents is when they read to their children early on, it's not about learning the letters of the alphabet. When children share books with someone they learn to love books, and love of books is the beginning of love of learning. And all of you who are here and pursuing education or have pursued it really got that from somewhere, this drive and a love of learning. It's more than a technical task of mastering it. It really comes from inside. I do believe it comes from the people who raised us, or friends, or something like that. It's some sort of combination. Didn't have to be reading per se. It's just a wonderful, easy example. And for those of you who know Dr. Seuss, who said, and I quote this, the more that you read, the more you will know, the more that you learn, the more places you'll go, which sort of captures that nicely. And this is something I mentioned to my health colleagues. We know if you smoke, that could impair your health over time and maybe your lifespan. We know if you're obese, that also does it. What people don't know is the biggest factor that will contribute to a healthier, longer life is the duration of your education, by far in a way. So not only is there something that we think about learning and the satisfaction with learning, this is sort of a solution, an elixir, so to speak, for health. The data is very, very clear. People with more education than less education live 10, 12 years longer and healthier. The point is not always the length of the living, but it's the health you have until you die. So if you're really sick and ill for 10, 15 years, that's not necessarily healthy, even though your length is longer. So just to let you know, we think about that differently. I want to give you just a little look at the brain so you can understand that this is beyond, that this is wiring of our brain, the kind of input, and the input has to be attuned to the child that matters. So there you see on the left, these brain cells are called neurons, and they each have a little tail, but they're not really connected. So it would be like having telephones in Boston and telephones in Turkey, but you couldn't talk because they're not connected. So that's almost what a baby's brain is like. There's not enough connection to coordinate either ideas or activities. But over the first year, these connections are made in numbers, huge numbers. And you could see even at 6 years, if you look at that, the only difference between the at birth and the 6 years is the number of connections. If you look carefully, they're the same number of brain cells, of neurons. It's the connections are different, and that allows learning and connecting to your motor part of your brain, to your memory, to your emotion part of your brain, to your frontal lobe, to control attention and things like that. All of that is needed to connect, and you can see it in a child's development who cries and needs someone to take care of everything, including eating and consoling, to children becoming more independent and over time doing more and more for themselves. But then you'll notice at 14 years there looks like less connections. That's called pruning. So it's a use it or lose it. So if whatever you're doing behaviorally, it's like lifting weights. If you lift weights, your muscles are going to get stronger. If you do something, these connections will remain. If you don't, they'll go away. So I'll give you one concrete example and then a theoretical example. Concrete example, they did brain studies of violinists, and they looked at the part of the brain where these fingers, where the violinists have to move them in a very fast, very coordinated way. And that part of the brain was bigger in those who were violinists versus the non-violinists. So what they had to do was reflected in, if you will, exercising the brain, and it became bigger, but bigger means also better. So it's associated with, you really sort of worked it out. So how does that apply to everyday living? The best example I think about is in countries where there's a lot of weaving. And any of you, and I'm sure many of you have seen weavers, their hands and eyes move so fast that I know my hands and eyes couldn't do that. And they learn this literally at the lapse of their parents, very early on. So I would imagine those connections that have to do with the visual motor coordination, eye and hand, and that kind of very quick, very fine, very perfected movement, those connections are very strong. On the other hand, if they don't have certain skills related to cognitive thinking or anything else, those might be a little weaker because it's not challenged. And now we know with school and the things I'm going to talk about, those connections for learning and thinking and being critical are built in and they remain, but probably very few people have the kind of skills for that. So it's what you use gets reinforced and stays in the brain, and what you don't use doesn't. And that's what that 14-year-old shows, that you have less connections, but the ones you use are still there. So that sort of lays the groundwork for this kind of notion of early experiences that are important. The next slide just goes to show the readiness of the brain, and you can see that even before birth, sensory pathways. So babies can feel, they can hear. Not clear about seeing even before birth, and then certainly at birth they can hear and see and feel. But the next part of the brain that comes into play is the language area, and that starts close to birth. It peaks at around 3 years and then goes down, and then you can see the red line is where higher cognitive function is. So sequence, what child development is there's a time and a time to challenge certain things. And learning a second language is a good example. People who learn two languages from birth because they have a bilingual home can usually, assuming they continue talking it, 20 years later, 30 years later, can speak both fluently and can speak with probably a regular accent. Because teachers talk about that language is caught, not taught. They hear words, they hear grammar, and somehow the brain figures it out. On the other hand, when you learn a second language like I did at age maybe 13 or 14, let alone even earlier than that, think about how you had to learn that language. You had to memorize words, you had to memorize the rules of grammar, and unless you practiced it daily, you know, a bunch of years later, you're not that good at it, and you certainly cannot speak with a natural accent. And basically, they did, again, a brain study that really showed this. So they had children speak both languages that they learned, they learned it at birth, and this language area of the brain lit up. This would be at age 10 or 12, I can't remember. Then they did the same study with children who had learned one language, but at a later age learned a second. So the original language they learned, it lit up in the same language place, but then when they spoke the language that they learned later, it lit up in a different place, suggesting it was a different process and not as efficient process to learn it. Again, it was probably a lot of memory, you know, got to memorize the words, memorize the rules of language and apply it. So, and some people have different heights and different things. Some people have this language area, I think, that are open and they can learn 4 or 5 languages throughout their life and are pretty efficient with it, but that's a very small number of people. So I'm just sort of giving you the background that says something about timing is important. Barriers to early literacy and learning, you all know what they are. Certainly poverty and low parental education. And when I say cultural child rearing, what I mean is for many people, particularly come from poor rural areas, there is no history of parents reading to children. Matter of fact, parents never even play with their children. What children do is they, at best, imitate the parent cleaning the house, which is actually play for them. And that was fine, given what we said before, what you're raising the children to do. But if we're raising them to start school ready to learn and be successful, they needed different experiences early on. And here's a study from the US where these researchers went into the home once a month for a few hours and recorded the number of words that parents or adults, caregivers said to the children. And they have 3 different groups here. You see the top is professional parents, the middle is working class parents. Oh, sorry. Here you go. Working class parents, and the bottom is welfare, which are our poor parents. So if you look at that at age 3 years, 36 months, children of professional parents knew over 30 million words. The children of the lower class, poor families, had 10 million words. So there was a different input. But the thing not only about was there less words that they heard, because less words spoken to them, many of the words were commands, were behave, stop that, you know, shut up, whatever it is, which doesn't carry a whole lot of meaning when repeated over, you know, 20 times a day. The other thing is there are less back and forth interchanges, conversation. So we even know from higher education now, listening to a lecture like this is probably what we do for efficiency's sake, but it's not the best way to learn. We want small groups and discussion, and we build that into our university. So discussion allows the interchange, lectures don't, and it's the same thing with talking to children. And I'm gonna emphasize that again and again about when you read to children or share books, it's the back and forth. It's not reading per se, it's the back, it's asking questions, it's pointing and naming. So again, this was the outcome of that study, that at 3 years of age, the children of professional parents had almost more than twice the number of words than the children of the lower income family, and the working class was somewhere in between. So there's some relationship between input and output which actually makes sense. And again, it's not the number of words per se that's important, but that's what's called the first early literacy skill, is to have language and be comfortable with language. And that's what books and that's what interactions with parents and children can do. Here's a very important thing. What we say frequently, parents should read to their children. And I start at 6 months of age. I say that's when parents should start reading, because there's something called joint attention, that the child and parent can look at the same time at the same thing, and that allows a shared reading. Before that, you know, a child can hear your voice, but they can't look at the same thing that you're looking at, and therefore it's just auditory. They hear the words, which is good, but that's not maximum of what the book reading is. So they have this joint attention, and the key thing, Pam, do you have, can I just see that? That these are children at 6 months, let alone a year, need board books with very thick pages so they can turn it, because if it's just paper, they can't turn it. And they need books, again, text isn't needed. They need brightly colored common objects that they know, whether it's something around the kitchen or something around the house, or animals. And then the point is, it's not reading. You don't even need text. You know, you point to, you know, where's the cow? Where's the fork? And I say the where is because children's receptive language, their ability to answer questions, the where is question, it precedes expressive language, saying the word, by about 6 months. So they can point to the dog before they can say dog. So you don't ask a 1-year-old or a 15-month-old, what is this? Because they won't say dog, they haven't got that word yet, but you say, where's the dog? And receptively, they can do it. Of interest, and I'm not sure why, although children, 6-month-old babies, love these board books of other children's faces. You know, that it attracts their attention more than anything else. And I guess I've been talking to people that maybe it's not clear that there are any of these board books in Turkey, but that's a good starting point for parents. And those of you who either are parents or will be parents, you know, my point is the reading, again, is pointing and naming in board books, not text. And I will show you something. And basically just sums up what is reading aloud. It's emotionally positive, verbally rich interactions with a book, playing, pointing, labeling. Dialogic reading means just back and forth, storytelling, and sometimes reading the story. And this is another way of sort of showing what I did in a pyramid form, that, you know, from 6 months to 12 months, it's the warmth in sharing. It's that kind of combination. Children love being with their parents. And, you know, what I said before, you know, that's when children share books with parents, they learn to love books and love learning. And that's what happens then. And that should always continue. And the best way, besides reading a book and deciding what's the best way to do it, if the child's engaged with you, whatever you're doing is probably good. And if the child's not engaged with you, you better try some other strategies to get there. And if you can't get there, it probably means they're too young to do that. So you drop back and to make adjustments. So what I say is, don't read the book on how to read. Read your child. Take the signals from your child. They're either engaged and happy, and whatever you're doing is fine, or they're not happy. And then obviously at 15 months, words and language become more important. And then at 2.5 years up, you know, print and stories become important. But keep in mind that there is this pyramid. And I want to show you something about the pointing and naming, and one of the things, so I want to show, can someone, how did we play this video? Can you help me? Okay. This was taken in a pediatrician's office. Can we get some sound on that? So this father is reading to his baby, a 9-month-old baby. The child's giving very clear signals. This is not working. So we tell him to read to the child, and that's what he's doing. So this is a pediatrician. This happens in a pediatrician's office where we give books. To this father's credit, a little modeling, 10 seconds, and he got it. See, now he's trying to turn the page. So hopefully this video, really visually shows you what I was trying to say. And that's somehow the key. Look at the child. If they're with you, you're doing fine, regardless of what the books say you should be doing. And if they're not with you, then you got to try some other things. And benefit, as I mentioned before, reading aloud stimulates all part of development: imagination, memory, attention span, language, cognitive development, imagination, and I will go on from there. So now we're at 1 to 2 year olds, and besides the board books and familiar objects, I think what is important, and good children's book authors do it, is basically doing rhyming and alliteration, because words that rhyme and the sounds that go together are easy for the child to remember. So even a child, when you read a half of a sentence, even with an 18-month-old, you stop and they'll continue it, not because they can read, but because of the rhyming, they can remember it and repeat it themselves, and they have a sense of mastery that they can do it. And I always think this book that some of you know, and I don't know whether the rhyming comes through or not, but in the great green room, oh, sorry. Now you know why I do books and not technology, because in the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of, and again, the words are, very rhyming, very alliterative, and 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens, a little toy house, and a young mouse. Again, I'm not sure in Turkish whether you get the same alliteration and rhyming, but certainly you do in English. And I'm going to move on, and there's something, later when you get to beyond 2 years and you get to the, okay, here, actually I'll show you some pointing and naming, and we just filmed this in our clinic, so you can just watch this, words coming from the mother. See, she's not reading, but she certainly has the child engaged. And she's involving the older child, which mothers know how to do naturally and can switch back and forth. And I just want to show you the mother. This came out spontaneously. For 3-year-olds, again, it's a progression. Stories from the child's life or folk tales or legends are something that they do, and even if there's a text, it's not just about reading. You read a sentence and then you say, what do you think the cow's going to do, or what do you think the person's going to do? So you use the text even to have a story and a dialogue. So again, it's not just reading the story for kids under 3 and 4, certainly 5 and above reading, but I still think using it as a discussion. So almost think of a book for a young child as a tool to create a conversation, because you can't talk about what you saw on TV with a 3-year-old, and there are a lot of things you can't talk about, but you can talk about what you're both seeing on the page. And here are just some visual reminders of what it looks like. This is a mother-child engaged, and look at the child's engagement, look at the mother's face. This is a lack of engagement. Wait, this is a lack of engagement. That's pretty obvious. And this is somewhere, in between, not ideally set up so the mother and baby can, really share that. Okay, I am going to move on, and I've brought books to other countries. I've been to Burundi, and I've been to Bangladesh, and even mothers who are illiterate, you give them a picture book, and I don't understand what they're saying, but I know they're pointing and naming, they're talking, and they're smiling with their child. Now we'll get back to some of the more environmental design pieces that I just want to mention before I finish. So this was something that was both a study and an idea that I think is replicable around the world. So you go to a supermarket and you have these little things that stick out perpendicular, little cards like this that says, it alerts the parent, question for your child, where does milk come from when you see the milk? And so it doesn't say what's, in this case, it's for an older child, it's not say what's the name of this, where they could say milk. It goes one step higher, where does the milk come from? Or in this case, what's your favorite vegetable? When they did this, and they categorized parents as either well-educated or not, the well-educated parents weren't talking any more than with this or without this to their children, but the lower educated parents talked 33% more to their children using this kind of stimulus. And I would like to suggest you all think about this as a very simple design issue about early learning, but it also creates, we're shopping, mothers are preoccupied with what they're doing, kids are off in space. And this way, while they're doing this task, it can be fun. And I think you'll find supermarkets probably will be interested in doing this for the obvious reason. There'll be a cachet about, doing this to help children and parents, and I would imagine there's a business case to be made for that. And there's a whole big instructions, if anyone's interested, how to set this up. There are a few of these in the US, but you might want to just think about this. So now I'm going to what are the environmental things that can be done in the community that either prompts parents or directly engages children. So this supermarket piece is one of them. And the other piece is called learning landscapes, which I shared. Were you able to load up?
Then we want this presentation?
Yeah, let me just finish, and then, and so learning landscapes, in a couple cities, they took bus stops. Now, bus stops, particularly in low-income areas, are just wastelands of space. So parents are there with their children, and they're on their iPhone, and the kids are sort of wandering, and nobody is focused. So they took some of these, and they built some engagement process for young children, for both learning and engagement, things that they can do with their parent while they're waiting. And so that's just one example. But this whole learning landscape thing is, how do you create in the landscape activities for parent and children to do? So that's one idea. A second idea is to actually give an indication in a city that children are part of that. So in Iceland, what they do when they have either water fountains in the old days, or benches, but smaller. Because, you know, really think about it. We have one size water fountains, one size benches. It's clear this is for adults and not for kids. What if you visually started showing these kinds of things in a physical environment that say, hey, kids are part of our world? Basically, the message is, you know, they're just ignored. In other places, again, in stores, stores have put spaces away, play spaces, while the parent is shopping. The kids can actually just go there in the store, you know, an area maybe 7 foot by 8 foot, and they're just toys there, and they can just play. So again, kids are being accommodated in, you know, in an adult kind of environment. And again, I'm just suggesting these ideas to stimulate you all in what you're doing. I know you're doing in the design area, but there's many little things. And Nooper and others, we have some child development students here. This would be a great project for some of them to come up with ideas of these spaces and what to do. The last thing I want to show you, the next to last, is what my colleagues did. Here, let me stop that a second. I think to create a different attitude about children and what children need, I think you need a social marketing plan to really create an environment where people start thinking about children. Now, in my lifetime, I've watched this really work for car seats for children, because there's a lot of emphasis showing these car seats. It took 5 to 8 years until now it's just about standard. I've watched this with no cigarette smoking. It took 5 to 8 years. I've watched this during the HIV epidemic with condoms. You know, people now can see and use it. So, you know, here's an idea that we can do for children. This is called Boston Basics, but basically I would see these kind of videos in many either public spaces, in supermarkets, or anything where parents are, just to send home ideas and models of what parents and children can do together.
The Boston Basics program, it's been launched also in several districts in Boston, is that correct?
And around the US. In other words, it's the kind of thing that if someone develops something, then the idea is dissemination. And if you get the right product, and it doesn't cost anything because it's free, it's finding a community, a city where people want it. So we tell people, at least in the US, you can call it New York Basics, you can call it San Francisco Basics, and what you might want to do if people are interested in Turkey is make something obviously with Turkish mothers and fathers and call it Turkey Basics or whatever you want to call it.
As far as I know, Bernard van Leer is actually pushing the municipalities to incorporate some of the Boston Basics, not some, there's only 5 anyhow, so those 5 messages into their communication strategy.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when the first one, or what is the most successful example? Which district is the right one to learn from?
That's a very good question. I think it's more of a struggle than we thought, and it's clear you have to find, a leader of a community or a community group. So even in Boston, there are little pockets of places, some housing projects that people use it, some early childhood programs where people use it, but it's not really, it was only introduced about 3 years ago. So I think all of these things, take time. But I want you to at least see the videos, because incorporating the message and actually sending the message, because I think this message is done as well as it could be done, and that's what impresses me. I really like it, the message or some sort of it to do those 5 things or 3 things is out there. But this does it in one of the most emotionally engaging ways that I could think of. And I think that gives it a power. And I think, again, as part of changing community attitudes and knowledge, I think this is a good first step. And do you want to show the learn? This will be just to give you, because again, I just want to stimulate your thinking about these learning landscapes. So we just pulled this up on
Learning landscapes lies at the juncture of the global cities movement and of early education, and we embrace the science of learning to help every single child have the greatest potential to succeed. It's about redoing cities and finding opportunities where we can have a little more fun and a little more learning going on. We are at the Please Touch Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is Parkopolis, the human-sized board game to help kids play with and learn about math and science.
When we were developing Parkopolis, we did a deep dive in the literature to pull out what are the most important things that young children need to be learning for science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM skills.
It feeds deeply into our commitment as a leading 21st century children's museum to be a partner in research that is helping the world understand how and when children learn best.
The science of Playbrary, it's about finding ways to build in more literacy, to enhance language skills.
A lot has changed. The aesthetic changed. It's a lot brighter in here now. There's more of a circular atmosphere, so the children come in, sit down, see what the books are, climb the wall. Physical development adds for a mental improvement. It allows them to understand about setting goals, accomplishing those goals, which goes into school.
It gets kids to want to come to the library.
Playwall is a giant chalkboard wall that says, when I was little, I loved to play. And then it prompts people to write down however they loved to play when they were little.
People walk up and they'll read the question and they'll think, what's something I played when I was a kid? And then you'll see them smile because now they're in touch with a memory. And they'll write it down. And it kind of seems like it makes their day good.
What we know is that when people are talking about play, they start to understand the connection between play and learning.
Urban Thinkscape is a project that attempts to take places in the world and turn them into opportunities for parents and children to talk to each other and to engage in playful learning together.
This project, it was introduced in the Belmont community and everyone's hands went up. I want it, I want it, I want it.
Urban Thinkscape is to take public spaces like bus stops and transform them so that it is imbued with learning opportunities.
There are 4 installations. The point of Puzzle Wall is that it's going to foster spatial skills, and we know that spatial skills are important for later math skills. There's 2 different runs of jumping feet. And then we have a little sign that suggests, okay, can you put 1 foot where there's 2 feet and 2 feet where there's 1 foot? So that's building some executive function skills.
The big vision for learning landscapes is a very big vision. We are looking for opportunities to take the everyday and make it extraordinary.
Again, I wanted to share this with you. You know, you're doing this and all over the world, people are looking for ideas, and I think, you know, we chatted about getting linked up with this so people can really share ideas. I think it'll take some money, but I think almost the limiting factor is a little creativity and thinking about what to do, and somewhere along the line, some of these things are not expensive to do, like the supermarket thing, and even some of those things that you do on the ground that kids can hop. So let me just end and thank you all, and just saying, you know, we're doing all of these things because the future of all of our societies are at stake, and they're in our children. And we want to give them not only learning, but we want them to have the social and emotional skills to work together, to learn together, to create loving families and loving communities. Thank you all very much.
Any questions? Soru var mı? Türkçe'de alabiliriz soruları. I'm going to continue with my questions on the Boston Basics because I'm curious about some of the and also the urban playscapes now that we have seen. Is there also any research that has looked at the effects of these? Also very curious about the motor skill development because we work a lot with playgrounds and especially trying to adapt more early childhood play into playgrounds because it doesn't always exist. Is there any research that has already started looking at the city?
This whole group is actually studying many of these things to their credit because it's pretty hard to do. As I said, the supermarket thing increased verbal exchanges 33%, which is, you know, I don't know whether a lot or little, but it looks good to me.
How did they document that, or how did they?
Literally observation.
Okay.
I mean, someone was there, literally watching and recording. No, it was this is university studies, and I would have to go back, or you can check to see which things have a research kind of thing. But I almost take a pragmatic view. If something's not expensive, like that hopping stuff, which, you know, so you get someone to paint. If kids are using it and parents are using it, that's good. You know, whether they have better motor skills or not, you know, it's hard to you know, we have measurements, but we don't have precision measurements to really look at many different things. The one thing nice about language, or somewhat, is you can count the words children say. But when things are scalable and inexpensive, using it, you know, and enjoying and watching people enjoy it is really the end result. But you can look on this. They've done a good job trying to do research on everything they're doing. Boston Basic, the research is just coming out, a lot of self-report from parents about what they do and what they don't do, and it certainly shows some attitude change. But these are tough things to study. And again, the thing about Boston Basics, you know, once you make it, it can be used everywhere or anywhere. So again, I think the challenge in the future, research is always important. I think the outcomes we have are tough to measure. The really important things are tough to measure. But the key is if it's scalable. If it doesn't cost much to put around, then that's another category. So research-based, particularly if it costs money, if you're going to spend it, you'd like to know that there's somewhat of an outcome. But for some of these things that doesn't cost much, you know, enjoyment and use would be, from my point of view, and that's just a practical point of view. My academic colleagues would not necessarily agree with me, but so be it.
Fair enough. Thank you for this answer. It's very useful. Another question in relation to that is, how is this, again around the Boston Basics output, how many different kind of research groups contributed to that project? It's not only Harvard University and the...
It was Ron Ferguson who shows here, basically was the driver on that. I helped helping introduce it in Boston, but this was his vision, and they did the videos. And the reason we got together, because I was working with the same public television to make videos too, which will be coming out soon. So it really was his, you know, basically on his own with an advisory board, but, you know, this was his passion.
But on the research, reached out to read.
Yes.
That's also actually has the same message, to a degree.
Well, the reach out and read is in doctors' offices, and it's something I started literally 30 years ago now. From 6 months to 5 years, and there are about 10 pediatric visits. The pediatrician actually gives a book and may spend literally 30 seconds. There's not a lot of time. You know, our feeling was that if we give immunizations, which is important for children's health, we should give books also. And the data from that, the research data, is very, very clear that children's language skills improve, parents read to the children more frequently, their home literacy environment, and I didn't go into that here, but the data is very clear. If it'd be interesting if you can get some some pediatricians to do it. I think the variability in many countries is pediatric visits are really short, and I don't know what it's like here, but at home at least it's 15 or 20 minutes, and other places around the world it's 5 or so minutes. But my feeling is there's very few preventive things that have data. So here I'm now going to say the opposite side. One is immunizations, and the other is giving a book. Everything else we do, it's not clear that there's data of effectiveness. I mean, they're all good. You can counsel on nutrition. We have a big obesity problem in the US. There's no data that a doctor saying anything changes nutrition in a family. These are you need behavior strategies to help parents set goals and develop action steps. The nice thing about a book, if they have it in the home and you model it, they'll mostly use it, and parents don't have to remember, because a toddler will come up, with a book in hand to give it to the parent, and basically saying, "Read to me, please."
And going back to this implementing the pediatrician office visit, the giving the book, what did it take to put that into practice, and how widely is it in practice?
We have over 5,000 pediatricians in the U.S., which is still maybe 25–30% of them, but only in practices that serve low-income children. We are not in a position to give away books, where parents can really afford to find it, although I think the modeling and the advice would be needed just as well. And we reach about 5 million children for about 30 years. But your point about implementation, and this is what I've learned, because I've done a couple different projects. I did something called the Medical Legal Partnership. I put lawyers in a clinical setting because their housing conditions and kids' health was really impaired. I put college students to make community connections. I did something called Healthy Steps, where we put a child development specialist in a practice. What I learned a long time ago is you go to the early adapters, people on the ground who have passion about doing something, and they'll do it. If I had to talk someone into doing it, it's not worth my while, because they're not doing it. Some people hear something, and they think, "Oh, I want to do that. Can you help me?" I say, "Sure." But if I have to start, if they say, "Well, what is the this and what is the that," I'm on to the next person. And I also usually deal at a ground level, because particularly with the pediatricians, I want the passionate ones. They get orders every week from above administratively of things they have to do, and most people just see it as just another thing. But you find the passionate people in any setting, and they will drive. You give them a little support, but that's the ones you have to find. Find the ones with passion and commitment.
Wow, that's amazing advice also.
To take, while reading a book, to take the child's attention under 2 years old, what is the average minute of reading a book?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think if you do it in a group, good luck if you can get beyond a minute, because kids, so group reading isn't great. I mean, the 3 or 4 year old, but the variability is still the same. Some kids can't sit for more than 2 or 3 minutes, and the younger they get, the less time they can sit. So for kids under 2, I'm not sure group reading does it. I mean, I've watched people read, and you've done it yourself. You do it for the 1 or 2 year old, and they're like this. And so you really need a one-on-one or a one-on-two. The one adult, maybe certainly one child, but maybe 2 sitting on either side of you. And I want to, I've said it before, but I want to emphasize the emotional connection. I think some of you who had parents who read may remember, if you think back, sitting next to your parents or sitting on their lap, feeling what the texture of their sweater or shirt that they were wearing, thinking how they're smelling. And this is unhurried time. Parents do, everything is in fast motion. It's hard to do reading to a child in fast motion. So this is really the one thing probably all day long that parents, can slow down with their child, and it comes naturally. You don't have to say it to them. You can't speed read to a 1 or 2 year old.
Also, again, a question: are there any differences between to make them sit or cuddling them? Because as a stranger for a
Yes.
parent.
Yes, no, it's hard. What you try and do is, that's why one of the hardest jobs, I think, are teachers of very young children. You have to work really hard to maintain their attention, particularly when you don't know them. So you change your tone of voice, you do something, you really got to work hard because their attention span is so little. So it's called, the technical word is scaffolding. So you have to do all of these things that, but that's what ultimately over time helps them develop a longer attention span. But it's hard work. You don't passively just read there. You have to watch their face, and if you see them going, you change your tone of voice, or you change your expression, or you push the book over this way. These are the kind of strategies, and that's why I'm saying do whatever you can think of. And if you watch other parents read, if you watch parents read to the children, you'll see those kind of strategies, which comes natural to most parents. But when you try and study it, it just doesn't make, it's not as rich as just watching it. When you watch it, it's just natural. In some ways, it's no different when you're having a conversation with someone and you want to make sure that they're listening to you, and you sort of get the idea that they're not. So, you look closer in their face, you change your tone of voice, you do all kinds of things to keep them on track with you. So it's almost intuitive once you develop those skills. You have the skills to do that with adults, but you probably don't yet, although learning to do it with young children.
What do you think about to tell a story to children, not to read a book?
Oh, I think that's great. I think people, and traditionally, obviously, it's storytelling. And I think, storytellers in stories of different cultures, different communities are fine. I think the book just makes it easier, particularly, I think, a younger generation, which does not have the richness of stories, and an older generation didn't have the books, so the richness of talking and telling stories was there. So I think singing, telling stories, it's all the same. The book is just a tool. It just allows you, if you don't have a story or a song, or it's just another thing to do to create the conversation. Nothing from the guys in the audience?
At least we have to, so that's good. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was really amazing. Thanks.